We're going to be entering one of the greatest books of the Bible in this study that I think that's available. 1 John is one of my very favorite books in the Testament because it emphasizes that we can really know that we're believers. Boy, it's a marvelous book. But it's a book that you cannot understand unless you know the historical background. This is a perfect example that it is impossible to interpret the Bible without knowing what the author was trying to say to the people of his day. So to do that with you, I want to give you a 30-minute introduction to 1 John. Now, we're going to show you the outline real quick. I'm going to put it on the screen so you can see where I'm going. I'm going to be doing basically the uniqueness of the book, authorship, date, recipients, and the main thing in background study is the heresy. We're going to be dealing with Gnosticism and what it means and how it impacts this book. Let's look first at the uniqueness of this book. You have received an extensive outline, and I'm going to be following that outline some and expanding it as we visit together. This is not a personal letter. It has no greetings to any individual throughout the book. It doesn't start like a letter. It doesn't close like a letter. Really, I think it's an office memo from headquarters, if you please. I think John, the last living apostle, is sending out a circular letter to the churches of Asia Minor where he served to combat the growing tendency of false teachers within the church. So I think it's like a homily, a sermon, more than it's like a letter. The only other book in the whole New Testament that is like that is the book of Hebrews. So Hebrews and 1 John are very similar. Now the letter is trying to build some very supportive things into the people of God. And I have 4 of them that I think this letter is trying to do. Number 1, it's trying to assert and emphasize the centrality of the person and work of Jesus Christ. Second, it is emphasizing the need for love within the Christian fellowship. 3, it is emphasizing the mandatory nature of a changed life if we are Christians. And number 4, it's giving assurance of eternal salvation to those who have put their faith in Jesus Christ, not simply in knowledge. Okay? Now, of all the books of the Bible, 1 John is the most simple grammar. Anybody who studies Greek starts with 1 John. I think the Bible has somewhere around 5,400 different words. 1 John only has 303. That includes prepositions and articles and everything. It is very simple Greek, but it is so profound that no theologian has ever been able to plumb its depths or transcend its width. Simple, deeply profound. I think the book will touch your life. I hope that you will think about buying some commentaries. I'd like to recommend 2. The Tyndale New Testament series, very good commentary. And what I recommend the most is the study guide commentary by Curtis Vaughan, put out by Zondervan Press. A very small book, paperback. I think it's the best book available. If you're looking for a very extensive reference book, then the New International Commentary series, and the particular author for 1 John is Marshall. And I think it's an excellent commentary, very in-depth, and I think one of those 3 will be very helpful to you. Now, let's look at the authorship if we could. The authorship of 1 John is caught up in the ongoing debate over the authorship of the Johannine corpus, which includes the Gospel, the 3 letters, and the book of the Revelation. And we're not going to have time to go into all that, but it is obvious to anybody who reads 1 John that it claims to be an eyewitness. And it fits in the life of the Apostle John, which I'll try to show you. There are 2 basic positions in our day. One is the traditional. Tradition unanimously asserts, this is from the early church, for right up through the Renaissance, that the author of the book of 1 John is the aged apostle, known as the beloved disciple. Okay? Now, let me give you a summary of the evidence, and I just want to read this. Many of you will not be familiar with the early church fathers. For those of you who are, this will be a good background. Number 1, Polycarp, who was a disciple of the Apostle John, Polycarp of Smyrna, writes in his book to the Philippians, he wrote about 110 to 140, he quotes 1 John. Justin Martyr, in his dialogues between 150 and 160, quotes 1 John. Allusions to 1 John are made in the writings of Ignatius, Papias of Hierapolis, and Irenaeus of Lyons. Irenaeus of Lyons attributes 1 John to the apostle. He says specifically that John the apostle wrote it. Now he's followed by Tertullian, who quotes 1 John 50 times. Tertullian is the great apologist of the early church, which is combating heresies, all kinds of heresies in his writing. He quotes 1 John 50 times. Clement of Alexandria, Origen, the Muratorian fragment written around 170 to 215 in Rome attributes 1 John to the aged apostle, and Eusebius, the early church historian from the 3rd century. Okay, now, what do we know about the apostle? I have a graphic for you that I will show you some of the aspects of the life of John. Number one is he's a son of Zebedee and Salome. Now, we don't know a whole lot about them. Salome, of course, in one of the Gospels, the one who asked the question, "Can my son sit at your right hand, Jesus?" They were fishermen on the Sea of Galilee. His brother was James. They were very successful fishermen. There's even been some theory that Salome is the sister of Mary, the mother of Jesus. And they base that on John 19:25 compared with Mark 15:40. Apparently they were very successful middle-class fishermen, not ignorant peasants that we commonly think. For they had servants, and we learned that, let's see, from Mark 1:20, and apparently they owned a home in Jerusalem, Matthew 20, verse 20. Also, John was a person of some renown because he had access to the high priest home the night that Jesus was put on trial, and that is John 18, 15, and 16. It was John, the apostle, who at the cross Jesus committed the care of his mother to. Now, tradition says that John lived in Jerusalem until the death of Mary, and then he moved to Asia Minor and set up his headquarters in Ephesus. And I would like to go to the map for a minute. If you have a map in the back of your Bible, you can see that probably the set of maps of Paul's journey is the best. Let's look at the map if we could. This is the map of Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, and this is what is known as the Roman province of Asia. This is where the letters to the 7 churches are written in Revelation 2 and 3. And here is the capital city, Ephesus, probably where John's headquarters were. Patmos is an island right off the coast where John was exiled and wrote the book of the Revelation. So you see, this is the area of ministry. It fits in with the 1 John, this is the probable recipients. It also fits into the book of the Revelation. So many of us believe this is where John lived and wrote. Now, when you read the book of 1 John, it is obvious that we're dealing with an eyewitness account. And you all see chapter 2, verse 1 and verse 8 is a good example of that. Okay, let's look at modern scholarship for a minute. The vast majority of modern scholars recognize the extreme similarity in phrases, choice of words, and theological emphasis between the Gospel and 1 John. Now, many believe, and I think I probably am a member of this group, that 1 John could be the cover letter for the Gospel. Now, why is that? In the Gospel, the emphasis from Word 1 is on the full deity of Jesus Christ. In 1 John, the emphasis from Word 1 is on the full humanity of Jesus Christ, and these are very complementary. Now, John is going to use terms. He uses contrast, light and dark, life and death, truth and falsehood. And this is very common to 2 different groups in his day. We learn from the writings of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Qumran community, that this is very common. And we learn from the Gnostic writings of the middle of the 2nd century that these are some catchwords that John is using probably to catch the attention of the heretics by using their own terms. Now, there's definitely an interrelationship between the books known as 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, Revelation, and the Gospel. But what that relationship is in much doubt. Many modern scholars see some differences. So they say that it's from the mind of one man, but probably was written by some of his disciples. I don't know about that. I just have some kind of problems with John not writing it. Now, 1 John doesn't claim that John wrote it. No author is mentioned. So it's only tradition and internal evidence that really gives us a hint. Let's look at the date if we can, and of course the date is obviously linked to the authorship. If John the Apostle wrote these letters, especially 1 John, we're talking about sometime toward the close of the 1st century. I believe John was somewhere around 14 to 16 when Jesus called him to be a disciple. He's probably the last living eyewitness to Jesus. These heresies had grown up. He began to write. I think targeted about AD 95 to 100, and that's been tradition. Now, that is pure tradition. There is no evidence for that, except that there seems to be some time needed for the development of these heresies, and the end of the first century seems to fit that. Jerome tells us that John lived 68 years after the crucifixion of Jesus, which would make him a very old man. And if you've read 1 John, his constant use of little children, my children, seems to infer an older man speaking to a younger group or congregations. Now, I'm going to deal with the term elder in 2nd and 3rd John when I do the introduction of those books, and I won't take time to go through it here. Now, this extensive commentary that I've talked to you about, the New International Commentary by Marshall, he is very open and honest in this, and he says that modern scholarship can date this epistle only between 60 and 100 AD. 40 years is the gap, and they don't know where to put it. Now, that's great honesty coming from a commentator, and it's true. We do not know. It is an assumption that these books were written late. We do not know exactly when John wrote these. Now, let's look at the recipients, if we could, for a moment, and by this I mean who was the book written to. This is going to be very important. There's been much discussion about authorship and date, and tradition asserts that it's the Roman province of Asia Minor, with Ephesus being the capital, to which John wrote. Now, the letter seems to be sent to a particular group of churches experiencing a common kind of internal heresy. That's obvious. Now, Cassiodorus, which is a writer of the early centuries, tells us that it was written to the Parthians. Now, if you're familiar with the book of Revelation, done much study in prophecy, you know the Parthians are synonymous with Babylon, or the Tigris-Euphrates river valley cultures. Now, I think this happened, and a misunderstanding from the elect lady mentioned in 2nd John and 3rd John, and the elect lady mentioned in 1 Peter, which says she's in Babylon. Now, I think that comes from 1 Peter 5:13 and 1 John 1 and 2nd John. Now, I think that in Babylon, of course, is a cryptic reference for Rome, and so I think Cassiodorus, or whoever he heard the tradition from, was really mistaken in that. So I think it's Asia Minor. The Muratorian fragment, which is the first official attempt to list the canonical books of the New Testament, written in Rome about 170 to 215, introduces 1 John this way, and I quote, "After the exhortation of his fellow disciples and bishops," 1 John. So that is asserting that John was encouraged to write this because of the common heresy that was dividing the churches in Asia Minor. Okay? Now let's look at the heresy itself if we can. This will conclude our introduction time. That letter is obviously a reaction against false teachings, and I'll get into that especially in chapters 1 and 2. The little phrase, "if we say," in verse 1, 6, 9, 10, "he who says," chapter 2, verse 9, chapter 4, verse 20, are obviously assertions of these false teachers, okay? And we learn the basic tenets of these false teachers from these assertions. Let me just give you a threefold division of the major tenets that seemingly they deny. They deny the centrality and humanity of Jesus Christ. They asserted his deity, but they denied his humanity. There's a lack of appropriate Christian lifestyle. Apparently they were separating theology from ethics. And third, there's a real emphasis on knowledge, which led to an exclusivism. Now that seems to be evident from the internal evidence of the book. Now I want to talk about the first century if I could. The Roman world was undergoing great religious changes in Jesus' day. The old Greek and Roman pantheons had pretty much come in ill repute. The mystery religions from the East, Isis, Cybele, Dionysius, those mystery cults were gaining great popularity because they emphasized personal religion and experiential religion. Into this malaise of religious amalgamation came the narrowness and the preciseness and the exclusiveness of Christianity, which said, a peasant carpenter from Nazareth killed by the Romans is God's only unique son, and by trusting exclusively and only in him is eternal life. Now, the intellectual Greek philosophers tried to combine the mystery religions, Greek philosophy, and Christianity into a new system of religious thought. This new system of religious thought tried, much like modern Baha'i, to be an eclectic approach and to give intellectual credence to Christianity to the Greeks of its day. So that is the motivation behind this. Now, let's look at some of the basic tenets of these Gnostics. I have a graphic I want to show you. I want to talk through it. And this is going to show basically what they believe. Now, number one on their tenets is a radical dualism between spirit and matter. Now, they believe that spirit was holy and matter was evil. And that's what basically caused their problem. You can look at the rest of that list. I'll give you emphasis on knowledge, on morality, loose or strict. There's a mixture of Greek philosophy and Christianity. And then finally, there's no documented evidence until the middle of the 2nd century. We're assuming that there's some kind of Gnosticism behind John's book. It's an incipient Gnosticism, and there's a book there you saw, The Gnostic Religion by Hans Jonas. That's the classical text in this area. Now let's talk about the dualism. They would say that God is fully spirit, and spirit is good, and we want to leave this body and go back to God in spirit, and that's the ultimate, the Greeks would say. Now, matter is evil. It's inherently sinful. It's coexistent with God, but it's inherently sinful. God did the best He could with what He had to work with. Now, they would say that since God is spirit and matter is evil, that God could not make matter, could not create. So there's a series of angels or eons or lesser deities between the holy spiritual God, and the last eon is the Jehovah or Yahweh of the Old Testament that created the world. Now, obviously, if Jesus claims to be fully God and fully man, there's a problem. Now, they believed He was fully God, but they denied He was fully man. There's two specific groups. Docetic Gnosticism, which comes from the Greek word seems, denied that Jesus had a human body. That when He walked by the seashore, He didn't leave footprints. Now, another form of Gnosticism, Cerinthian Gnosticism, from Cerinthius, says that the man Jesus was indwelt by the Spirit of Christ at His baptism, and the Spirit left Him before His crucifixion, so the man Jesus died and was later rewarded because of His faithfulness. Now, those two are all a part of denying the full humanity and the full deity to the person of Jesus of Nazareth. Okay? Now, also, there's two other reactions to this. If spirit is good and matter is evil, then knowledge comes in. If you know about God, if you know the secrets to get through these angelic realms, then you're saved. And if you're saved and right with God based on knowledge, then how you live is not important. Matter is evil. It doesn't make any difference how you live. So they developed a very loose group of Gnostics that anything goes. They're called antinomians or libertines. They were just people who indulged the flesh. But another radical group developed, and that is if the flesh wanted to do it, abuse it. And they would hurt their bodies and wound themselves because they thought it was spiritual. If the flesh wanted it, they'd starve themselves. If the flesh wanted to be warm, they'd make the flesh cold, and on and on. So two different extremes developed. A very loose kind of morality, a super strict, harsh legalism out of these Gnostic false teachers. Okay? Now, incipient Gnosticism is what we believe is the background of 1 John, but we can't be certain because there's no documented evidence. Valentinus is one of the first. Some of the Gnostic Gospels of Thomas, the Coptic Gospels, or some later 2nd century works that we deal with. Now, I've mentioned Docetic Gnosticism and Cyrenian Gnosticism. There's a couple of other possibilities that I'll mention to you briefly. Ignatius, in his writings, mentions that possibly there is some Gnostics that he's dealing with. We don't know anything about them. Ignatius, in his writing to the Smyrnians, okay, people of Smyrna. Also, in the writings of Irenaeus, there is a man known as Meander of Antioch. Now, he claims sinless perfection, and he had a Gnostic tendency, so he may be the specific background. Or his followers, the group he comes from. We don't know a whole lot about the first century world, but it is obvious that you cannot understand 1 John if you do not understand the Gnostics, or at least the false teachers and what they claimed. So as we go through 1 John verse by verse, I'll be pointing out the possible link to the heresy, as well as the basic tenets of experiential Christianity to which he affirms we can know that we are believers. I've really enjoyed being with you, And we're going to be doing the chapter 1 next time. God bless you.